Hi there. Tonight we step into a medieval marketplace at dusk, where the air smells like wet straw, wood smoke, and something faintly questionable bubbling in a clay pot over a crooked fire. You hear the shuffle of wooden clogs over cobblestones, a donkey braying somewhere behind you, and the distant toll of a church bell reminding everyone it's curfew soon. But tonight, we're not here for prayers or porridge. No, we're following the whispers, the strange recipes, and the jars filled with powders and pastes that promise love, luck, and sometimes protection against a rather inconvenient baby. And trust me, you probably won't survive this one without a raised eyebrow or two. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You make your way past the grain stalls and turn toward a crooked shack with a sagging sign painted in faded red letters. Inside, a woman in a patched linen gown is hunched over a table covered in bundles of dried herbs, mugwort, pennyroyal, and tansy, their bitter scents stinging your nose. These aren't for soup. They're part of a long tradition of what we might call early family planning. Pennyroyal tea, for instance, was brewed by women hoping to avoid unwanted pregnancies. Historians still argue whether it was ever remotely effective or simply a dangerous way to make someone violently ill. Either way, you sip at your own risk. And let's just say, medieval people weren't big on warning labels. A little further down, another apothecary proudly displays small clay jars filled with powdered dragon bone and dried beaver glands. You raise an eyebrow, and he shrugs, muttering something about virility and stamina. Dragon bone, of course, is just fossilized animal remains, ground fine and sold for a hefty profit to men worried about their performance. The beaver glands? Technically castoreum, a musky substance that smells like a mix of leather and vanilla. Supposedly, if you mix it with wine, it stirs desire. Whether it actually worked or just distracted everyone with its odd scent is up for debate. And then there's the infamous crocodile dung. Yes, you heard that right. Imported from Egypt at absurd expense, it was dried, mixed with honey, and sometimes inserted, well, let's just say it acted as a very unpleasant barrier method. Imagine the conversation. Darling, pass the candle. And the reptile poo. This was before latex, after all, so options were limited and often deeply unromantic. Some historians argue the dung's acidity might have had a mild effect. Others insist it was just medieval pseudoscience with a side of humiliation. Either way, it shows you how far people would go to control nature before anyone knew what a hormone was. The smells of the market grow stronger as you weave between stalls, each one offering some charm or mixture that promises love, pleasure, or at the very least, a distraction from the drudgery of fieldwork. One bearded man in a red cap waves you over, pointing to a collection of tiny cloth pouches. Inside each, he says, is a charm, ground pearl, rose petals, and a lock of hair. Tie it to your thigh, he insists, and she will not conceive. Whether that's due to any mystical property or simply because your partner is laughing too hard to continue, you can decide for yourself. A sudden gust of wind carries the sweet, sticky scent of honey from another corner. There, two young women are carefully heating beeswax mixed with powdered herbs, shaping it into little discs. These, they explain, are to be placed internally to cleanse and balance before a wedding night. The effect? Probably nothing. Beyond a placebo. But in a time when bathing was rare and infections were common, even the idea of something clean and scented was probably reassuring. Plus, honey was mildly antibacterial, so perhaps there was a sliver of accidental science in the mix. Historians still debate whether such practices were widespread or only for the wealthier households who could afford imported spices and local gossip. as you step away from the honey stall. A toothless old woman grabs your sleeve and whispers a recipe for what she calls a lunar draft. It involves boiling wine with mint, ash, and a sliver of iron on the night of a full moon. Drink it, she rasps, and you will not bear fruit. You wonder if this is medicine, magic, or just another excuse to drink wine. Probably all three. And while there's zero modern evidence this worked, rituals like this gave medieval people a sense of control in a world where childbirth could be as dangerous as any battlefield. Behind you, a gaggle of teenagers giggle as they barter for sprigs of love herb, likely just wild parsley, but sold as a talisman to slip into someone's drink at a feast. The logic? If the parsley floats, your target will fall for you. If it sinks, better luck next fair. Is it romantic, superstitious, or just another excuse for a drink? Likely all three. Again, as twilight deepens and the market shudders, you're left with the scent of mugwort and honey in your nose, and a vague unease in your stomach at the thought of crocodile dung as a romantic necessity. But this is just the beginning. The medieval world wasn't just strange with its potions and powders. It had rules, blankets, and even holes in the nightshirt waiting for you beyond the next turn in the road. You leave the marketplace behind and find yourself walking toward a small timber-bird cottage, where the faint glow of a single candle flickers through a shuttered window. The air is cool, heavy with damp earth and wood smoke, and every so often, you hear the distant toll of a church bell, warning everyone that curfew is near. But in this little cottage, curfew doesn't mean sleep. It means a married couple, stiff with nerves and duty, fumbling through intimacy under the scrutinizing gaze of the church figuratively, and sometimes you'd swear, literally, inside. The room is lit by just that one candle, dripping wax onto a pewter plate. A man sits on the bed, nervously twisting the cord of his plain linen nightshirt. His wife, still in her shift, glances at the wooden crucifix nailed above the bed as if expecting divine judgment to descend any moment. On the table beside them lies a folded blanket, not for warmth, but for modesty, cut with a single round hole in the center. The idea? One body part exposed, everything else covered, so intimacy could happen with as little temptation as possible. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just a satirical exaggeration, whispered about by travelers and moralists. But the concept captures the rigid tension of medieval bedrooms all the same. The church was, to put it mildly, everywhere. Priests preached not just about your soul, but about your sheets. Certain nights were banned outright for marital relations: Advent, Lent, Fridays, Sundays, holy feast days, and sometimes even Saturdays, depending on who you asked. Do the math, and you're left with fewer than half the nights in a year when you were permitted to fulfill your marital duty. And yes, it was considered a duty more than a delight. A confession guide from the 14th century even instructed priests to ask married men whether they approached their wives for pleasure or solely for offspring. Guess which answer was approved? The blanket, the hole, the rigid scheduling, it all worked together to create a strange paradox. Desire was natural, but indulgence was sinful, unless carefully quarantined inside marriage, and even then, often, only for procreation. You imagine lying beneath that heavy, scratchy wool, trying not to cough from the smell of lanolin and smoke, both of you staring at the crucifix while quietly praying no one outside hears the creak of the straw mattress. Romantic? Not exactly. Necessary for salvation? Supposedly. And yet, in spite of all this, people found loopholes. Some couples had secret agreements, using coded candles in their windows to signal when a non-duty night might still be worth stealing a moment of intimacy. Others simply ignored the rules, hoping their local priest was more focused on tithes than tallying their sins. There's even a record from a small French parish of a priest caught selling sin licenses for a coin or two, letting couples do as they pleased on otherwise forbidden nights. Was he excommunicated? Absolutely. Did his customers get refunds? Doubtful. Of course, not all of this was about prudishness. Part of the church's anxiety came from a real, if exaggerated, fear of spiritual pollution. The belief was that unrestrained desire weakened the soul and could even open the body to illness or demonic influence. There are documented cases of priests advising couples to sprinkle holy water on their bedsheets or recite the Pater Noster during the act to ward off any invisible corruption. You try not to imagine whispering prayers mid-embrace, but apparently, some people did exactly that. And then there's the nightshirt itself, another layer of control. Some monasteries and moral guides promoted its use for married couples, suggesting that clothing reduced sinful thoughts and minimized temptation. The shirts were long, loose, and sometimes sewn shut except for a small opening at the appropriate spot. Picture it. Two exhausted peasants, one fumbling with buttons by candlelight, both trying not to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it. Historians still debate whether these garments were truly widespread, or mostly the obsession of particularly zealous communities. But the fact that multiple church documents mention them suggests at least a kernel of reality. Outside, the cold wind rattles the shutters, and a distant dog barks as you linger in that dim room, imagining the awkward mix of duty, fear, and muffled giggles that must have filled countless medieval nights. The reality is, no matter how many blankets, holes, or nightshirts the church prescribed, people were still human. Desire didn't vanish because a priest said so, and love, or at least lust, had a way of slipping through even the tightest woven rules. As the candle burns lower, the wife finally blows it out, plunging the room into darkness. The sound of the straw mattress creaks, slow and tentative, while the wooden crucifix watches silently from above. You can almost hear the whisper of a muttered prayer, the tension of holding onto both faith and flesh at once. Tomorrow they'll return to their chores and their confessions, but tonight they navigate the strange dance of love under a wool blanket, a single hole cut out, and the constant weight of divine eyes. And if you thought this was as strange as it gets, wait until the next turn in the road, where whips, chants, and ecstasy blur the line between devotion and something far more earthly. The path from that creaking straw bed leads you into the echoing streets of a walled town, where moonlight glints off puddles in the cobblestones and the distant sound of chanting rolls through the night air. At first, it sounds holy psalms, rising and falling like waves. But as you follow the voices, the rhythm changes. The chants deepen, the beats sync with the crack of leather, and you realize this isn't just a procession of prayer. It's a gathering of the flagellants, men and women winding through the streets with whips, chains, and a fervor that blurs the line between penance and something far more complicated. The flagellants were, on paper, religious zealots. During the 14th century, especially when plague swept through Europe, they roamed from city to city, flogging themselves in public to atone for the sins of humanity. They believed, or at least proclaimed, that each lash brought divine favor, perhaps even sparing entire towns from God's wrath. But as you stand in the shadows, watching the procession sway and shudder, it's clear something else is happening. There's a strange electricity in the air, a mingling of pain and release, the kind of intensity that doesn't stay confined to repentance alone. You notice how their eyes glaze, how the rhythm of the whips takes on a cadence, almost hypnotic. Some fall to their knees, trembling, their breathing shallow and quick. Others weep, not with sorrow, but with something more primal. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were purely spiritual or, for some, a sanctioned outlet for otherwise forbidden desires. After all, in a world where the church controlled nearly every aspect of the body, the combination of pain, exposure, and communal ecstasy may have stirred feelings that had nothing to do with theology. In one German chronicle from 1349, a monk complained that some flagellant groups were turning holy penance into spectacle, with crowds gathering not to repent, but to watch, whisper, and in some cases join in. He claimed that after the processions ended, taverns filled quickly, and sin followed swiftly upon sanctity. Was he exaggerating? Maybe, or maybe the lashes open more than just the skin. You follow the line of participants as they move into the town square, forming a circle. The sound of whips fades for a moment as a robed leader steps forward, holding a wooden cross high. His voice echoes, reciting a prayer about purging sin through suffering. Then, in a practiced motion, he pulls his own robe to the waist and delivers a strike across his back so fierce you wince, the crack echoing like a snapped branch. Blood beads instantly, but he doesn't flinch. The crowd gasps, not just in piety, but in a strange, shared thrill. You can't help but think back to the couple beneath the blanket, whispering prayers to stifle any flicker of pleasure. Here, the prayer is loud, but the flicker, well, it's not so easy to snuff out. Some medieval physicians even theorized that self-flagellation balanced the humors, claiming that pain could release excess melancholy or lust. One particularly eccentric Italian doctor suggested that whipping redirected bodily heat, reducing carnal urges by exhausting the body. Whether that's bad science or just a justification for rituals that had already slipped into something more sensual, you're not sure. But as you watch a young woman collapse into the arms of another penitent, their faces only inches apart as they chant, the distinction between spiritual cleansing and emotional abandon feels very thin indeed, and it wasn't only in the streets. In some monastic communities, especially more ascetic ones, private flagellation became a tool for controlling desire. Monks and nuns were encouraged to scourge themselves when plagued by impure thoughts. But not all followed the rulebook so piously. There are accounts quietly recorded by scandalized abbots of these sessions devolving into something less about penance and more about shared physical intensity. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were, but the fact these reports exist at all hints that the line between discipline and indulgence could blur even in the cloister. Chanting grows softer now as the group kneels, their bodies streaked with red lines and sweat glistening in the torchlight. The air smells of iron and smoke, and the ground beneath your feet is sticky where drops of blood have darkened the stones. A final prayer is murmured, voices low and almost tender. Then, slowly the flagellants disperse, some limping, others leaning on one another, a few laughing softly as if they've shared a strange, intimate triumph. You're left standing there, wondering whether what you just witnessed was holy devotion, a grim carnival, or something uncomfortably wedged between the two. The night feels heavier as you walk away, the sound of distant whips still echoing in your ears. You realize the medieval world didn't just fear the body, it also found startling, sometimes scandalous ways to channel its power. And as you leave the square, a faint smell of rosemary and smoke draws you toward another corner of town where love potions, charms, and whispered trials of the heart await. The rosemary-scented air leads you to a crooked lane where lanterns swing in the evening breeze, casting long quivering shadows on the uneven walls. The street is quieter than the bustling market or the wild chants of the flagellants, but there's a different kind of energy here, one of whispers, secret handshakes, and sly exchanges beneath hooded cloaks. You're entering the world of medieval love potions and charms, where desire was brewed, bottled, or bound with a whispered prayer, and where proof of love sometimes came with trials that made the nightshirt hole seem mercifully simple. A wooden door creaks as you step into a cramped shop lit by a single oil lamp. The shelves bow under the weight of bottles filled with liquids in shades of amber, green, and cloudy white. A sharp, sweet scent, rose oil mixed with vinegar, clings to the air. Behind the counter, a stooped man in a velvet cap slides a vial across the wood. For the heart, he murmurs, or perhaps for the body. The label reads mandrake and wine. You recall how mandrake root, with its odd, human-like shape, was believed to heighten desire. Some even said its scream when pulled from the ground could drive a man mad, though historians still argue whether that was folklore or just a warning told by clever herbalists to protect their trade. Love potions came in all forms, powders mixed into ale, honey cakes laced with saffron, even charms stitched into little leather pouches. One recipe from a 5th century French text advises grinding dried sparrow brains with cinnamon, then slipping the powder into your lover's drink. Whether the poor soul tasted anything beyond regret is unknown. And yet, people swore by these concoctions, clinging to the idea that love or at least lust could be coaxed from a jar when words failed, and it wasn't all private. Sometimes, love and loyalty were tested in the open, with a kind of theatrical flair that only the medieval mind could conjure. Imagine a village square, cobblestone slick from last night's rain, as a crowd gathers around a nervous young couple. A trial by touch is about to begin. The man is accused of straying, and to prove his innocence or his partner's worth, he must reach into a cauldron of boiling water to retrieve a ring. If his hand emerges unscathed, their bond is pure. If not, well, maybe the burn is punishment. Enough. Historians still debate whether such rituals were common justice or rare, sensational performances to reinforce social order. But the records of blistered hands suggest at least a few unlucky lovers faced the steam dot in another corner of Europe. Particularly in Italy, there were whispered tales of binding rituals. A woman might tie a knotted string soaked in her own blood around a man's wrist while muttering an incantation, believing it would secure his fidelity. Did it work? Likely not, unless the man was already devoted or terrified. But such practices thrived because the stakes were high. Marriages often meant alliances, property, or survival, and keeping a partner loyal could mean the difference between security and ruin. And then there were the amulets, small, often made of bone, copper, or even carved jet. Some bore symbols of Venus, others carried cryptic Latin phrases like Amor vincit omnia, love conquers all. These tokens might be worn on a chain, sewn into clothing, or even buried beneath a threshold to anchor affection in the fagin on a chain. Home. The more superstitious might pair the charm with a ritual, such as circling a tree backwards at midnight while whispering the lover's name. Whether this summoned passion or just the local gossip is, once again, a point historians still argue. You pause as a woman in a crimson cloak brushes past, dropping a sprig of basil at the threshold of the shop. The herbalist nods knowingly. Basil, in some medieval traditions, symbolized fidelity and could be used to cool the humors of a wandering heart. But it wasn't all gentle remedies. A darker recipe, whispered by a wide-eyed apprentice, involves grinding the bones of a bat with wine and anointing a lover's pillow to keep them from straying. You decide not to ask how anyone acquired bat bones in bulk, but judging by the smirk on the apprentice's face, it probably wasn't in bulk at all, more likely the work of an opportunistic merchant spinning myths to sell whatever scraps they found. Outside, the lane is almost silent now, save for the distant drip of water from a gutter. The shops shutter one by one, but the whispers linger, slipping through cracks in the shutters. These charms, potions, and trials weren't just curiosities. They were lifelines for people navigating love in a world that saw romance as duty. Danger, or sometimes a little of both. As you move further down the lane, a faint murmur of laughter and music drifts from a large stone hall ahead. Here, love and desire won't be hidden in potions or whispered beneath cloaks. Instead, they'll be paraded, judged, and sometimes mocked under the watchful eyes of the so-called courts of love, where poetry, punishment, and public shame intertwine. The murmurs of laughter and the faint strum of a lute draw you to the threshold of a sprawling stone hall, its windows flickering with torchlight and its banners heavy with embroidered crests. Inside, the air is warm, perfumed with spiced wine, and the faint musk of too many bodies gathered under a timber-bird roof. You slip through the crowd just as a herald in a green tunic strikes a gong, calling for order. What awaits isn't a sermon or a feast. It's the peculiar spectacle of a medieval court of love, where romance, lust, and public spectacle are bound together in ways both absurd and humiliating. You ease into a corner as a noblewoman in a shimmering gown takes her place at a raised dais, flanked by two other ladies of status. These women act as judges, presiding over a gathering that feels half tribunal, half theater. Below them, a nervous young knight kneels, his head bowed as a bard recites a scandalous verse, accusing him of breaking a vow of fidelity. The hall erupts in laughter when the bard compares the knight's wandering eye to a fox stealing hens. These courts, especially popular in France during the 12th and 13th centuries, weren't official legal bodies, but they carried social weight. Their purpose? To arbitrate matters of the heart with a mix of playful poetry, mock judgments, and sometimes public humiliation. One by one, cases are presented. A troubadour accused of writing love songs for two different patrons. A lady rumored to have exchanged favors for favors under the maypole. A merchant's son who dared to elope without his family's blessing. Punishments vary. Some must compose apologetic poems on the spot, their words weighed and ridiculed by the crowd. Others are forced to wear absurd costumes like the lanky squire, now parading around the hall in a pair of donkey ears while reciting a ballad about his undying devotion. Historians still argue whether these courts were primarily entertainment, subtle social policing, or both, but the written account suggests they left a lasting mark on the participants. Reputations. The atmosphere oscillates between merriment and menace. A portly judge raises a goblet and declares, "To love, which lifts and lowers us all." The hall cheers, but you catch a flicker of unease on the face of a young woman brought forward next. She's accused half-jokingly, half-seriously of luring a rival's fiancé with her sorcery, which in this case means she baked him honey cakes sprinkled with saffron and whispered his name by moonlight. Her sentence? To stand on a barrel in the center of the hall, hands on hips, while the bard composes a bawdy limerick about her culinary skills. The laughter is loud, but the blush on her cheeks burns brighter than the torches. And yet, amid the mockery, there's an undercurrent of admiration. Love, even when tangled in scandal, is treated as a force to be celebrated, or at least indulged, provided it can be contained by rhyme and ritual. The courts, for all their absurdity, gave people an outlet, a stage on which they could play out the dramas of their hearts without swords or prisons. The judgments weren't binding, but reputations could be made or broken in a single evening. And the memory of a humiliating verse could linger far longer than any official decree. Beyond the hall, on the edges of these gatherings, punishment could take a rougher turn. In some towns, lovers accused of scandalous behavior, real or imagined, were paraded through the streets on carts, forced to wear mismatched clothes or carry symbolic objects, like a distaff for a cuckolded husband or a broken lute for an unfaithful minstrel. These rituals, called charivaries, were meant to shame, but they often devolved into rowdy celebrations, with neighbors jeering and children pelting the offenders with flowers or, less charmingly, with mud. Historians still debate whether charivaries were acts of moral enforcement or just excuses for communal entertainment. But either way, they reveal how public and performative love could become. The hall quiets as the final case of the night unfolds. A grizzled merchant, accused by his much younger wife of neglect. The crowd murmurs as the ladies of the dais deliberate. Their verdict? The merchant must, for one full moon, serenade his wife nightly with verses supplied by the resident troubadour. If he refuses, he forfeits his prized hunting falcon to the court. The hall erupts in cheers. The lute strikes up a playful tune, and goblets are raised as the evening dissolves back into music and laughter. As you step out into the cool night air, the echo of song and mock trials fades behind you. The road ahead is empty, lined with skeletal trees and glowing patches of mist, and the world feels quieter now. All those strange customs, the crocodile dung charms, the nightshirt holes, the whips, the potions, the chivalries drift together into a single thought. The Middle Ages were not shy about making love and desire a spectacle, even when they wrapped it in rules, rituals, and ridicule. The torches burn lower as you walk further from the hall, the sounds of laughter softening into a hum. And the wind down begins. The night is still, the sky a velvet sweep punctuated by pale stars, and each step you take feels softer, as though the world itself is easing into slumber. The spiced air of the hall lingers faintly on your clothes, but out here, it's replaced by the cool scent of dew settling over the fields. Your breath comes slower now, matching the gentle hush of the distant river. Even the echoes of laughter from behind you fade, like a melody trailing off at the end of a long song. You picture the candlelight of a quiet cottage, flickering softly, the walls lined with shadows that move as if breathing. The voices, the rituals, the chants, all of it slips away, replaced by the simple rhythm of your footsteps and the rustle of leaves overhead. The air is cool and still, as if the world is pausing just long enough for you to exhale. Each breath feels deeper, each sound softer. The ground beneath you is firm, but it doesn't resist. It cradles each step, steady and calm. The road seems to lengthen and fade, carrying you forward with no effort, as though you're drifting rather than walking. And with every breath, every heartbeat, the strangeness of the medieval world dissolves, leaving only the quiet certainty of the present moment. Now, as you pause beneath a lone willow tree, its branches trailing like curtains in the night air, you feel the weight of your eyelids heavy and warm. The world around you hushes to a whisper, a single note of stillness. Let your shoulders drop, your mind loosen, your breath slow. The journey through the oddities and whispers of the past is over, and all that remains is the calm sleep now. The road will be here in the morning,